Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the final edition of Not So Traditional Grammar. I'm Ross, your host again for another episode, I suppose. Like I said, the last one today, we have a fun topic on hand. We're going to be talking about grammar and the internet and how the internet has helped to shape the English grammar in some ways, how it changes it, how people view this change in a lot of ways. We're going to look at some theories and expand from there. Hope to keep this one a little shorter and sweeter, but we'll see. I like to ramble, and this is a topic that I like particularly. So good luck. Good luck to us. We'll see how that pans out. The plan in more concrete terms here, I want to talk about three things in this order. First, I want to very briefly revisit a topic that we talked about in the last episode of Not So Traditional Grammar, which was how has technology and the internet in particular affected language change? So we're going to look at that just in a second. We're eventually then going to spend a little bit more time talking about a couple different perspectives or theories on what I'm going to call computer-mediated communication, or CMC. And computer-mediated communication is a study, a field of study in its own right that looks at, lo and behold, communication done through computer-mediated means. So this includes things like the internet, obviously, email, but also texting and phones, even just like traditional phones, all mediated through computers or through technology these days. We're going to look at a couple relevant theories from that field of study. And then we're going to end off looking at one meme in particular in the effort of brevity. I decided not to go into too many of these. Just one. We're going to be looking at the Doge meme, or the doggo meme, and a couple issues surrounded it, including the language used therein. So let's start it off. This is a throwback to last episode. We looked at historical linguistics, and one of the key underlying concepts of historical linguistics was this, the Uniformitarian Hypothesis. And here's a quote from Bill Labov in 1972, but essentially what this says is that the way that languages have been changing forever continues to hold now. That the same types of changes that happened to language 6,000 years ago are the same types of changes that are happening to language today. It has nothing to do with uniforms, if you're wondering what the image has to do. That's how you can remember this. Uniformitarian hypothesis, nothing to do with uniforms. Uniformity across time periods in the changes that take place. And one major challenger, I told you last time that the uniformitarian hypothesis wasn't without controversy. And one of the sources of this controversy is this still true in 2020? Is the world actually the same, linguistic change-wise, as it was 6,000 years ago? That's a good question, and a lot of people are not so sure about this anymore, particularly given the rise of things like technology. And so this has the potential, has a bunch of potential. One of the ways that technology could have changed language and how language changes fundamentally is through globalization. So people used to be relatively limited in the set of people whom they could talk to. You know, you could talk to your neighbors in the town or the city that you lived in, which depending on the size of the town or city varied considerably. And you know, you had a reasonable sphere of influence around that area, but really not that far of people who you had regular communication with. Now, given writing and letters and mail services as one change to that, but even more revolutionary in the same vein, is the internet sending emails, texting, posting on forums with people from wherever, constantly and instantaneously. That's a serious change to who we talk to. And who we talk to is a big player in language change. I'll say that again. I'm going through this relatively quickly. Again, you might need to pause and rewind on your own time to let this set in more fully, but who you talk to is a big factor in language change. You're influenced by your peers. And so if your peers are only the people in a little geographic region around you, that has one set of effects. That's kind of the way that languages have always worked up to this point. But if we've then expanded that to your peers and who you're getting linguistic input from to be a much wider global community, that could theoretically change things significantly, such that this uniformitarian hypothesis holds. So we have a couple responses then to the uniformitarian hypothesis. One of them is the one that I sort of just outlined, this globalization process. We could say that technology changes everything, and that the uniformitarian hypothesis no longer stands. It's a reasonable response we could have. Another sort of dialed down response we could have in the face of technology and the uniformitarian hypothesis is that it's changed the pace, this sort of instantaneous nature of long-distance communication on the internet, things like viral videos, things like Twitter, things like that can, maybe they don't change the nature, the very fundamental nature of language itself, but they could change the pace at which things change. Again, I guess the one to latch on to here is something like a viral video, which can start in one place with a particular linguistic trait. Doesn't necessarily have to be an innovation, but I can think of when a viral video showed up with somebody saying "on fleek," and that kind of swept through the internet world, and then that started to pop up in people's speech all over. Right, the speed of that change that was enacted. Again, that wasn't necessarily an innovation. On fleek, I believe, existed before then, although I'd have to do some research. But the speed of that change was pretty unprecedented, or would not have necessarily taken place a few thousand years ago. Or a third option is that language is still language, and it doesn't change that much. We shouldn't get, all antsy about these different things of technology, because at the end of the day, we're still using language to communicate with each other. And that's the fundament, and that hasn't been altered by speed or by who you talk to. You're still talking to people. So cool. That's all I have to say about that. But since I was talking about the internet and technology today, I wanted to revisit that and outline that a little bit more clearly. Flesh that out in more depth. So let's move on to point number 2 here. We're going to look at a couple theories of computer-mediated communication, which is, they're going to look at how technology has changed language. And we're going to shift then at the end of this point into how technology has shaped and altered grammar itself. So I'm going to present to you 2 different perspectives on computer-mediated communication. These aren't necessarily theories, these are kind of bundles of theories. So there's a bunch of different computer-mediated communication theories that all kind of live in the same zone. And that zone I'm going to call the cues filtered out zone. And I didn't innovate any of this, I'm regurgitating prior scholarship, particularly by Joseph Walter, who lumps these together in a cues filtered out theory. And what this group of theories wants to say is that computer-mediated communication is lacking. Kind of full stop. That's the main thrust of this perspective, is that CMC is lacking. Lacking how? Lacking when? Lacking why? Lacking in comparison to face-to-face communication. That's the big comparison point. And this cues filtered out theory in particular wants to say it's lacking when compared to face-to-face communication because it doesn't have all of the cues that face-to-face communication has. It doesn't necessarily have facial expressions or body language, things like intonation of voice, the pitch and rate and all of that kind of things of the way that I'm speaking can be lost in some forms of computer-mediated communication. Even sometimes who you're talking to, you don't know, right? There's a level of anonymity that technology can have on communication. that is somewhat particular to computer-mediated communication. Okay, a few notes about this. One caveat before I talk about these types of theories more is that these theories were particularly prevalent in, let's say, the early 90s-ish. A little bit before, maybe even. And so what they're talking about in particular is text-based computer-mediated communication. It's not all of computer-mediated communication, right? I'm talking to you right now through a computer. It's not even the same day that I'm recording this that you're hearing this, right? It's very computer-mediated. I'm literally looking at a computer right now. And yet you're still getting my facial expressions, silly as they are. You're still getting my intonation. You're still getting maybe my shoulder body language as I'm a little nervous doing these recordings, etc., etc. And hopefully you know who I am. I'm not anonymous at this point. So this doesn't count for all computer-mediated communication. It's kind of particular to the types of computer-mediated communication that were popular at the time. Think email. Just think email for now. It'll make it easier. So that's one caveat to these, and that's going to be true of the next theory, next brand of theories that I talk about as well. What we can see, coming back to this though, is that this is a largely negative outlook on computer-mediated communication. It's kind of a downer, right? It really is. It was intended sort of to be a downer. It held computer-mediated communication compared it against face-to-face communication and found it to be left wanting, right? To be lacking in comparison. There's one particular aspect of, so I'm going to leave it mostly there, there's one particular aspect of these theories that I want to talk about, which is de-individuation. It's a big catchword in these theories. And what de-individuation is that it says that the fact that these cues are filtered out, that you can't see people, you might not know who they are, you can't hear their voice, etc., prevents, I'm reading now, prevents users from attuning to others' individual characteristics, such as charisma, dominance, affection, resulting in a cognitive reorientation of its users. And this happens largely in two ways. Here I'm on the second quote. This lack of nonverbal cues leads people to become de-individuated such that they become self-focused. They become self-focused. So two things happen. One, when I can't tell who you are, I can't hear you, I can't see you, I can't whatever, I start to treat you less like a person. It's really easy to dehumanize others when in this de-individuated state. That's one effect of it. And a second effect is this second quote here. It leads people to become self-focused. And in some iterations of de-individuation, the second half applies. Resistant to influence, disinhibited, belligerent, and effectively negative. So in this original conception, I hope that makes sense. I'm going to pause because this is kind of a weighty concept, de-individuation. When you can't connect with other people through these cues because these cues are lacking, you treat them less like a human and you retreat into yourself, perhaps taking on these negative characteristics. De-individuation. In its original conception, de-individuation was seen as, without exception, a bad thing, right? That people would fall back on their baser instincts and that they would lose themselves alongside losing sight of other people, and they would become a seething, frothing, mindless mob. Grab your pitchforks and your torches and let's go. That kind of thing. This line of thought traces back to like revolutionary France, for instance. It's got all kinds of baggage accompanied with it, political and classist. But you can see that showing up here in these kinds of quotes. They become disinhibited, belligerent, and effectively negative. Those aren't particularly good things to be. At least they're not what I aspire to. So this was kind of the original conception of de-individuation. And if CMC, follow my line of reasoning here, if CMC causes de-individuation through its lack of cues, and de-individuation is a negative thing, well then CMC is a negative thing. Like this, yeah. CMC oh gosh, my errors are all mixy matched. C leads to de-individuation, lead, and this is a bad thing. I spelled it wrong. Then CMC itself is a bad thing, right? There's that like transitive property going on here. A more subtle variant of this theory is called the side theory. Ooh. The side theory. It stands for something on the spot way too much. Probably something with social and de-individuation, and yeah, I'll get there eventually. Ask me later if you want to know what that stands for. And what this more nuanced theory of de-individuation says is that instead of falling back in on their baser instincts, what people do in a de-individuated state is they fall back on social identity. I bet SIDE stands for social identity de-individuation effects. That's my guess. Anyway, that instead of falling back on these inherently bad things, when people become de-individuated, they lose sight of both your and my own individuality, they fall back on group identity. They behave like the group that they associate with is expected to behave, which can lead to things like mob mentality if there's the social group that is being identified with is angry and violent. Sure, that's a thing that can happen, but it's not necessarily the case. They've done some really interesting studies where in one study, they bring people into a testing facility and they have them wear like colored clothing, and the colored clothing matches up to, so these are college students. They have college students come in and participate in this study, and they say like, if you're a hard science, a STEM major, wear all blue. Wear blue. And if you're in the humanities, then wear yellow. So, and wear like baggy clothing and make sure your face is covered. So what they've done is IRL de-individuated these people because they're wearing baggy clothing and their faces are covered. They've taken away sort of the cues of their individual identity, and instead what they've done is assign them, highlight, exaggerate their social identities, their group identities. And they found that people systematically, after they were in such a clothed state, would toe the line of the expectations of their group more rigorously. So if you ask them questions about various science topics and evidence-based practice and things, the STEM majors overarchingly towed the line in the way they were expected to answer those questions. And the humanities the same way, where if you just brought people in and you didn't de-individuate them by making them wear colored, baggy clothing, they ran a spectrum more than just falling into these two polarized groups. Again, I'm going through this fast for the sake of time, but hopefully you're catching the big picture ideas of what's going on here. That's what I want to say about this first theory. This is the cues filtered out theory. It's largely negative. It's largely a negative one. So in the second group, I want to present to you a more positive outlook, a more positive perspective on computer-mediated communication. And this is brought to us by Joseph Walter. He has several theories that fall into this, and this bundle. And the thrust of this bundle is that, yes, computer-mediated communication can lack cues. Admitted, granted. But essentially that people are smarter and better and relentless in communicating their own emotions than they're given credit for. So if you take away their cues, if you take away body language, you take away intonation, you take away all these things that people typically use in face-to-face communication to express themselves, they're going to find other ways to do it. They're going to use the means given to them to express the same amount of stuff, emotional stuff, to use a technical term, that they would have anyway. So a classic example of this is that, okay, people can't see my face, right? In texting or in email, there's no facial expressions given. So what do we do instead? Emojis and emoticons. These are direct transpositions of facial emotive states done in the means, with the means you have at hand, text. They're done graphically. Originally, the emoticons, not the emojis, right, are smiley faces like this, used with the colon and the parentheses. Oh, I only highlighted part of it. Bolded part of it, to express various emotions. So they're adapting. This didn't exist before. Like, you don't find, I've been listening to Hamilton this morning. You don't find Hamilton writing to various people and like putting smiley face, colon, and parentheses at the end. Right? It's just not a thing that happened in other mediums, or like people don't just say colon parentheses, they just smile. This is an innovation, an adaptation of computer-mediated communication to shore up, in some ways, a feature that has been filtered out through the medium. Does that make sense? Cool. So emoticons, like I said, are the most like kind of face-up version of this. But there are other things. It's more subtle than this. It's not just like emoticons and then we're done. We adapt the way we write. Grammar is altered by the same adaptation principle in computer-mediated communication. I came back around to grammar eventually. I knew you guys were waiting. It had to be not so traditional grammar, not just like not so traditional internet stuff. I'd be fine teaching that class, by the way. Somebody sign me up. Anyway, it's more than just emoticons. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. You guys ready? In this hypothetical situation, you as a student or whoever is watching this, I don't know, putting it out in the ether, you haven't seen a friend of yours in quite some time. This is the hypothetical situation. So put yourself in it. Put your role play hat on. And after the last time you had hung out with this friend, it ended kind of awkwardly. It kind of was tense. Maybe you didn't get along about something. Maybe you even had a fight. I don't know. But you haven't seen them in a little while, and you want to reach out to them via text. So you're going to be the bigger person. You're going to text your friend. And you text them this. You say, hey, go with me to the movies this weekend? Like a question, you're offering to go with them. Look how good. Good job, role-playing people. You are kind people that are, taking the first steps. I like it. You send them this text. I want to know, I'm going to show on the next slide a series of possible responses that you could get to this text that you just sent. And you're going to tell me which one you want to get back. Okay. So, option number A, this. This is one possibility of something that your friend texts you back. Let's say they texted you back immediately. Or this. Or this. Which one of these three responses do you want to receive, provided that you are actually in this hypothetical situation? You do actually want to hang out with this friend and, make out with them and have a good time, whatever. Which one do you want to receive? It's not close. It's not even close, right? You want to receive A, obviously. Obviously you want to receive A. And more so than just being the best option, these are hierarchically related. They're in a hierarchy from A to C. This is the best option. This is like not a great option. You probably wouldn't be like super enthused if this is all they texted you back, but this is obviously the worst option. And that's what's fascinating, because exclamation points, have been used for this kind of enthusiasm for a while, so that's not necessarily something new. But this distinction between B and C fascinates me. It fascinates me. Why is the periodless one not great, but the period one is terrible? Like, we might need to talk if you send me a text like that, right? There's a difference, and I hope you can see that. And what's fascinating even more so, I should use that word less, but what is also interesting and cool is that this isn't even the end of the possible variations of these okay answers that you could get. If they could respond with a variant of the word okay or the phrase expression okay, they could look like this. It could also just be okay with any of the various punctuations, the nothing, the exclamation point, or the period. That's what I'm trying to express here. They all have internal variants. Or they could just say K with an exclamation or nothing or a period. Or they could say K written out like this. And each of these different answers, A through F and even D through F with its further variants of punctuation, carries with it different meaning. It carries with it different meaning. These are adaptations, and you can think of these as adaptations for grammatical adaptations, right? That these carry different meaning based on which version you get. That's an adaptation that's happened in the relatively recent past, within a lifetime, that has changed the English language. Maybe it hasn't changed the English language in the way you write your doctoral thesis or something like that, right? You're probably not going to include any of these very meaningfully, but in the not so traditional grammar sense, which is what we're focusing on, this matters. This is a change to the English language that you all are tuned into. It's part of the rules. Now, that being said, there can be generational differences here and differences with expectation. If my mother, for instance, texts me back this okay period, I'm not that worried because it's just how my mother texts. She, in some ways, doesn't know the rules that, haha, you and I, excellent viewer, that you and I are tuned into. And we might not even be. I'm old now. I got a kid and everything to boot now. We might not even have the same rules anymore because I'm older now. You might have moved beyond this, but hopefully you can at least tap into this knowledge with me enough to understand the point. The point is, like, we might not necessarily share a rule system for this, but these rule systems do exist and are constantly being altered. The grammar of these is constantly being altered in the English language. How about that? How about that? Cool. And this is interesting too, right? Like, you see this kind of generational, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but you'll forgive me. You see this kind of generational variation all over the place. So one of the other places on top of punctuation that I find this really interesting is like who uses different emoticons and emojis and things. So for instance, like what's the difference between this smiley face versus this smiley face? Who uses versus like an emoji, right? So picture a smiley emoji here versus this version of an emoticon versus this version of emoticon. They come with different generational baggage. This is, I don't know if you share this impression or not, but this is an old person way to do it. If you've got a nose in your emoticon, you're probably old. Yeah, sorry, I said it. I said it, internet. I don't take it back. So there's cool, interesting differences in the way that we do these sorts of adaptations of English grammar. Regardless, let's go back to the home point here of CMC adaptation. The point is that people will find different ways to express themselves grammatically, to communicate, to convey the various things that they would normally in face-to-face communication. They just do it differently. Cool. That's that. That's all I want to say about these two different theories of computer-mediated communication, because they have bearing on computer-mediated grammar and English grammar in general. Now I want to change. I'm going to leave that, put a nail in that aspect of our talk, and I want to move to our last topic. I'm going to look at a particular meme, and we're going to break it down. We're going to break the grammar of this meme down in what I hope is an interesting way. And the meme that I have chosen here is it's this this word here. There's actually some debate on how you say this, whether it's doggy or Doge. I like Doge personally because I think it's funnier. So I'm going to call it the Doge meme. And here are some examples. So I've laid out 3 different examples of the Doge meme for us to view, right? Amaze Afro, wow, so paint, very art, much PBS, many happy. Very alarms, wow, much morning, many sunshine, so serial, wow. Right, and here's 50 Shades of Doge, such kink, very sex, wow, by the Doge Weekly. I thought that one was particularly funny. So here are these, oh, you can't even, I'm in the way. No, oh, you get the idea, hopefully. Can I make myself smaller? Yeah, I'm gonna make myself a little smaller. Yeah, you can see this. So what I want us to do, what I want you to do is think about what are the key elements of this meme? What are the key elements? I want you to put on your linguist, your grammar hats if you want, and do a structural analysis of this Doge meme. What do you need to have? What are common elements? What are essential elements to how this meme is pulled off? So you can use these three, if you're aware of this meme, you can use other ones if you'd like, but if you're not, you can look at these three pictures that I provided and extrapolate out what's going on here. What's going on? What do we need to have? If we're going to build, we're going to go to some meme building website and build ourselves a Doge meme. What do we have? What do we include? I want to say too that I'm riffing off of an article written by Gretchen McCullough, who is a linguist who writes about internet things, who I think does fantastic work. So I'm borrowing a lot of information from her website. So this isn't totally me generated, or even mostly me generated. It's mostly Gretchen McCullough's work. Credit where credit's due. It's fascinating. So hopefully, while I've been vamping here and stalling, you've been thinking about what the key structural elements of a Doge meme are. Here are some, right? Here are some key Doge meme things. First of all, there's a common font being used in many of these. This is Comic Sans. You can see it on the right, although it's a terrible image. So we can key into things like that. Another thing is that it uses bright fluorescent colors, except for this 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades of Doge. Of course, it's a bit of an outlier. But largely bright fluorescent colors in lowercase. There's a picture of a dog in all of these, and there's a picture of not just any type of dog, but this particular type of dog featured here, which is a Shiba Inu. And we'll talk about that later. That's actually going to be relevant, so don't forget that. And there's these 1 or 2 word little blurb phrases, much cake, do want, such sponge, and wow. Wow is, always included in this Doge meme, so it's particularly noteworthy. Does that make sense? Does that make sense what we did? We broke this meme down into some structural elements, such that if you wanted to replicate a meme, this would get you on target. And maybe you don't need all of these, like we see in this 50 Shades of Doge. It has the dog picture, but it has a different font and different colors. And it has these phrases just the same. So you need to mix and match at least a few of these to pull off your Doge grammatically. What I want to strip this down to now is just the linguistic elements, just the grammatical elements of this particular Doge meme here. So I've copy and pasted some examples of Doge language into this slide here. Here's some examples of, and I've split them up by these 2-word phrases and these 1-word phrases. The 1-word phrases aren't particularly interesting because they're just one word. They're literally just a list of words like wow and amaze and excite. The 2-word phrases are much more interesting. And what we're after now is that what goes into the structural, what are the structural elements, what goes into the construction of these 2-word Doge phrases? Because they're not just any 2 words. Like I can't just, here I'm going to call this not Doge phrases. I can't just have any 2 words like cool story and Iran and the billboard. Like those aren't Doge phrases. Those are not Doge phrases. But if I write something like very, very violin, such wine, much yay. Those are much, and then I put wow at the end, right? That's better. That's better. And so what we want to know is what is structurally different about these not Doge phrases and all of these other Doge phrases. Right? It's linguistically particular. There's something about these that you've noticed, and if you've seen this meme before, you're aware of. English speakers pick up on this fairly frequently, readily, easily, I should say. What is going on here? There's something grammatically interesting going on here. What's going on is that these Doge two-word phrases systematically violate traditional grammar rules. They systematically violate traditional grammar rules in the following way. Phrases, particularly two-word phrases in English like this, have what I'm going to call selectional restrictions. Certain words go with certain other words. It's just how grammar works. I don't know, I haven't been sitting in your class. Perhaps Professor Johnson has already talked about these kinds of things. If so, great. If not, this is kind of what it looks like. So think about the word much in English. Much works with what are called mass nouns. They're not countable, they just appear in large, kind of undifferentiated quantities. And much works with those kinds of mass nouns, like much water, much wine, much rice. Right? Rice, technically countable, but hard to count, so it gets lumped in as a mass noun. Much works with these mass nouns, but much does not work well with count nouns, much more countable objects. So it's weird if you say much apples, much stars, much computers, much plants, things like that. It's not good. Those are too countable. They go in a different class of noun, actually, called count nouns. And many works the opposite way. It works very well with count nouns, many apples, many stars, many games, whatever. But it doesn't work with mass. So they're complementary in that sense. So many rice, many water, doesn't work. Ungrammatical. Put the stars next to these ungrammatical ones. And a lot of different modifiers or quantifiers in English have these sorts of selectional restrictions. It's not just many and much, so we can see very, for instance, as well, works most often. It's a little bit more variable, a little bit more versatile, but it largely works with adjectives. And it doesn't like to work with like very, very cool, very sad, totally fine, nice adjectives. But it doesn't work great with nouns, so like very koala, excuse me, and it doesn't work it doesn't work well with verbs either. Like very sleep or very run or things like that. Oof, not so great. Not so great. Again, this one has exceptions, but as generalized rules, we see these working within traditional English grammar. Traditional English grammar. And thus, looking back on Doge, what we see is an intentional, systematic, we call it a flouting of these traditional rules. They don't find it. So, right, where are some manys and muches? Much infinity, many robe, right? Many goes with this count noun, and much goes with infinity. Much feels, very art. This actually doesn't. This is actually not a very good Doge phrase. Very sad. Too good. Too grammatical. Oh, let's get that out of here. Many happy. Much better. Much better. They violate the selectional requirements systematically. That's what makes these ones good and these ones bad. You might not have thought of that without this handy-dandy linguistic analysis of the Doge meme. Now you guys know perfectly how to speak Doge. And so things like this pop up. Again, think back to our first point about viralness and the spread and propagation of these different grammatical variations, grammatical adaptations here, this one used for comic purpose, that happen in an online state. Do we expect this to become a permanent fixture of the English language? Probably not, but it's a glimpse into grammatical variation that does exist. And again, it exists for a certain type of purpose, in this case, to meme with comedy, right? So we've broken down some of the grammatical elements. Now we are now all fluent in Doge grammar. You can all go forth and prosper, make all kinds of Reddit front page memes in Doge and do it correctly. But I want to circle back to one lingering issue with this Doge meme. Why the dog? Why the dog? So we've explained the grammar pieces of this, but I want us to think about why does that dog, what is the dog lending to this meme? And is there anything particular about a Shiba Inu? I hinted at this earlier. Because it's not just any dog. Note that these Doge memes, they don't appear with just any old dog, any old breed of dog. It's always a Shiba Inu. Or, there's exceptions like this. There are some exceptions in the 50 Shades of Doge or whatever, but by and large, it's a Shiba Inu. There's a few possible explanations for this. We'll go over a couple of them here. One particular explanation that's been furthered, including by people like Gretchen McCullough, is that Doge, what's happening here is that Doge is a riff or a play upon what's called infant-directed speech. These are it's baby talk, right? Or motherese, it's been called before people realized that fathers also talk to children. It's baby talk. And so that this Doge grammar is mimicking this simplified way that parents sometimes talk to infants or toddlers, and extending it to dogs as to dogs as like fur babies, right? So we often talk to dogs the same way we use baby talk to dogs. I'm sure you've heard people do this. I'm sure many of you do this yourself. Sometimes people get criticized for doing that, but you talk to dogs in a certain voice and a certain grammar as well. And that this meme is a representation of that. That's one possibility. But for me, that leaves a little to be wanted. I'm not quite satisfied by that. I'm after more. That explains dogs in general appearing with this, but it doesn't necessarily explain why it's a Shiba Inu particularly. And there doesn't necessarily have to be an explanation of why it's a Shiba Inu. That could just be chance. But I've seen and heard other explanations that it's less random. And a second explanation here is that Doge is modeled after speech errors. So these selectional restrictions that I've given to you earlier are actually quite difficult to master for foreign second language learners of English. These are difficult aspects of English to master because they rely upon noun distinctions like count and mass, which don't really show up in other places as often. We know the difference between nouns and verbs, but the difference between count and mass nouns is more complicated. So what this Doge grammar is doing is intentionally erring in the same way that foreign second language learners of English make errors. And this gets us into possible hot water, tricky territory, because it provides a possible explanation for why a Shiba Inu. There's a correlation supposed here, hypothesized, between foreign or second language learner speakers of English and the way that they use language and a foreign dog. There are claims, right? These go so far as to claim that this Doge meme is racist, has racist undertones at least, because it is using the image of a Japanese breed of dog while simultaneously making fun of English speech errors. And there's enough glimmer of correlation there that I think we need to be careful, right? This is the type of thing that we need to be aware of. Am I condemning, I'm going to be a little bit clear here, Am I condemning all use and enjoyment of the Doge meme as racist and that makes you a racist? And no. That's not what I'm doing at all. You can keep using it for all I care. I won't come after you. There's no, like, racist meme police that's going to get you, I think. But what I want to use this to highlight briefly is that it's good to use linguistic, structural, grammatical analysis of things, even things as sort of random and trivial seeming as internet memes, to use that as a lens to see things. And maybe every once in a while, when you do that, you find that the thing that you thought you were doing harmlessly is maybe not harmless to everybody. Maybe there are people that are actually taking offense to that, and that's something that we want to choose to key into and be aware of. Again, it's not a condemnation of Doge, but it's a way in which a grammatical analysis and a careful, thoughtful eye may be able to see things that we weren't aware of before. Why is that? Okay, one last leap. You'll follow me. Last leap of the whole series here. And why does that matter? And why do we want this more critical lens that could show us things like possible racial undercurrents of the Doge meme? Why is that? Why do we even want that? Yes, we do. You do. And why do you? Why do you, class? Because you care about people. And it's people that matter at the end of the day. That's the message. That's my last message of this not so traditional grammar thing. Why do we care about any of this language junk to begin with? Oh, language junk. We care about it because it matters to people, and we care about human beings at the end of the day. That's what matters. I don't care about using the wrong quantifiers or modifications when you say, like, very violin. No, I don't care about that. But I do care about people that are hurt by various usages of language. That's why we care. That's why we care about any of this language stuff, really. It's because we care about people. That's what matters. All right, I didn't mean to end it on such a downer here, especially not when we're talking about language in the internet. So I hope that's not too much of a downer. I hope that's a call to action, right? Is that what we want to be after here is making the best changes we can and having the best interactions we can for people's sake. That's the one. That's the ticket class. So I'm out of here. That's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed some not so traditional grammar. We did a bunch of things. We looked at linguistics in comparison to traditional grammar. We looked at syntax in comparison to traditional grammar. And then we took a few fun detours looking at grammatical change in English over time and kind of grammatical change and alterations in grammar through technology and technological means. So that's all I got for today and for this series. I'm going to make myself available in some fashion. I'm going to talk to Professor Johnson about that. I'll either be at the end of class, I'll show up virtually, not in person, but virtually, or I'll have some office hours. If you have any questions about these not so traditional grammar topics, there's a lot of avenues that I left unexplored, just for strict time. So I'm happy to follow up with any and every question you have about that, whether it's about modern linguistics, whether about historical linguistics, about internet linguistics, about meme grammars, whatever you want to talk about, I'll make myself available for that. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your interim and take more linguistics classes, selfless plug, and I'll see some of you hopefully in the spring when I'm back in action. Have a great day and a great rest of the semester.